everyone. Hope you're all doing well. This is my week 7 video, and today I want to talk to you about the midterm exam because that is what we're doing this week. There is a review sheet for you, a prep sheet, and that's the very first thing that you need to be focused on is preparing for this midterm exam. So if you'd like to follow along with me, go to content up at the top of our Brightspace course page, and then go to course documents, and then click on the midterm exam prep sheet. So this week, the week of October 5th through the 11th, you'll be taking your midterm exam in American Lit. And you need to complete both parts 1 and 2 of the midterm and submit them before 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, the 11th of October. So very important to do that. The exam consists of the following: 5 multiple choice questions. They're each worth 10 points. 5 quote identification questions, and they're worth 10 points each. And then 1 short essay question worth 100 points. So there are 200 points possible, and that makes up 20% of your final grade. So here are the things that you want to be studying for part 1 of this midterm. Know the following periods and genres, and remember that's a fancy word for types or kinds of literature in modern American Lit, and their basic common themes, characteristics, ideas. So realism, local color realism. You want to understand how realism differs from naturalism, from romanticism. And of course, romanticism came before our time period that we're studying, which begins in 1865, right at the end of the Civil War. You want to understand what sets local color realism apart from typical realism, right? So you want to look back at the sheets about each of these ideas. African American literature of the late 19th, early 20th century, and I think I said naturalism, but naturalism as well. Early 20th century poetry, imagism, and symbolism. So look in your syllabus or in your weekly checklist at all of the documents that you should have been reading along the way up until now about all of those ideas. And also go back and read through the discussion boards. I'm going to open them all up for you so that you can read them, and look at all the comments to make sure that you have a good grasp on the readings. Pay attention to the quotes, the terms, the main ideas that have been pointed out on the documents that we've read and in the discussion board questions. So read the questions, even the ones maybe you didn't answer, or even the ones where you were not responding to a classmate, so that you're very clear, because these discussion boards are taking the place of what would have been in-class discussions. So you want to make sure that you are familiar with the whole discussion before the midterm. And be sure that you've watched my videos up to this point. So again, you want to know those various genres, their time periods, very important. You'll have to memorize that. Their salient points, so the important points about them, and their identifying elements, because you cannot use your textbook or documents during part 1. You absolutely cannot do it. Part 1 is divided up into 2 sections, and the first section consists of 5 multiple choice questions. And here's an example of what one of those questions might look like. The period of time that encompasses the realism period in American literature is A, 1914 to 1945, B, from the war between the states, that's the Civil War, up to 1914, C, from the Civil War to the turn of the 20th century, or D, 1850 to 1910. Well, if you said C, you're correct. And in fact, a little bird whispered in my ear and said, you know what? This very question just might appear on that midterm And those students who are watching the video and doing what they're supposed to do are going to have an advantage over those students who aren't watching the video. So, yay you. The second section of part 1 of the exam features actual quotes or passages from the text that we've read up to this moment in time. It will be your job to identify the title of the text and the author. And so a listing of those text titles and authors will be provided to you. However, not all of the names of the authors and the titles that are listed will actually be used. So it will be your job to figure out which quote is coming from this author who wrote this piece, right? Which one matches up correctly. And note that I will not trick you and mix up the wrong authors with the wrong titles. If there's a title and an author's name, that author will have actually written that piece. So it's not my job, I don't think, to trip you up in ways like that. But here's an example. In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. So you'll have a bank over here, a listing of titles and authors' names, and it'll be your job to figure out who wrote those words and what piece it appeared in. And if you knew that that's from Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Exposition Address, good on you, because you are correct. That same little bird is tweeting around in my ear and saying, that question just might be on the midterm too. So if you're watching the video, you're really going to be in an advantageous position compared to your classmates who don't watch the video musings. So good job. So again, this is where actually going back and looking at the discussion boards, all of them, all of the questions, right, for all of the boards about our readings will be important, because that's where these quotes are going to show up. They're going to come from questions from the board. And then part 2 of the midterm, as I said, consists of a short essay question. For part 2, you can and you should use your Norton Anthology textbook and class documents. You'll be expected to write at least 4 to 5 paragraphs in response to the prompt that you'll see here in just a moment. Your essay should have a clear, identifiable thesis statement, and it should have paragraphs that contain topic sentences. So the very first sentence of each paragraph, the topic sentence, and then 2 to 3 main points in your paper. So you'll have an introduction with your thesis at the end, and then you'll have your first body paragraph that highlights your first point, your second body paragraph that highlights your second point, your third body paragraph that highlights your third point, and your conclusion. You must quote from your chosen text at least twice. At least twice. If you quote more than that, that's fine. But you must quote at least twice, and you must cite the quotes within your paper in correct MLA formatting. You will not need a works cited page, but you do need to cite the quotes in the body of your paper. Your essay should contain a formal heading in MLA formatting, and it should be double-spaced, typed in Times New Roman 12-point font. And here is that essay question prompt that you should write about. Choose and comment on one text that we have studied so far this semester. So you're going to look at your syllabus, you're going to look back at all the readings that we did, and you're going to choose one. And my suggestion is to choose a reading that really resonated with you, something that you really enjoyed, because if it's something that spoke to you, you'll do better in writing about it. So here are the questions you're answering. What are the main messages and themes inherent in that text? So what main universal idea is coming through in that story? And then the next question, what particular genre or technique does this work represent? So is this work representative of realism? Maybe it's particularly representative of local color realism. Maybe it's naturalism. Maybe it's a piece from the African American lit of the late 19th, early 20th century. Maybe it's early 20th century poetry, or maybe it's imagism, maybe it's symbolism. And your syllabus lays out those little sections for you so that you see how each of those readings fall. What elements let you know that this particular text serves as an example of its specific genre and technique? So those are the questions that your paper needs to answer. So in your introduction, you want to open up with a sentence that sort of is broad and that hooks us in. We call that the hook. A sentence that makes us want to keep reading your paper. You want to introduce your text that you've chosen and give us the title of that text and give us the author's name. And then you want your thesis at the end of that introductory paragraph, and then you're going to start listing your points. So main messages and themes. What's the genre, right? What's the technique? What elements? What lets you know in that text that this is an example of local color realism, or this is an example of imagism, right? So your essay needs to contain that formal heading on page 1, and I give you an example there. So your name, my name, the course name, and the date in correct MLA formatting in the upper left-hand corner, and then your last name and a page number in the upper right-hand corner of all the remaining pages. So I give you some examples with Princess Fufu, my cat there. And you see how the date looks, 9 October 2020. So you do not say October 9, 2020. MLA says you need to say 9 October 2020 with no comma there. So here's an example of an incorporated quote with a correct in-text citation in MLA formatting. You want to make sure you don't drop any of the quotes that you're using in your short essay. And the way that we know that a quote is dropped is that it appears by itself as a sentence. If a quote appears all by itself as a sentence, you dropped it. You have to integrate it, incorporate it into a sentence of your own. So here's an example. The author masterfully presents a seemingly naive young man who poses as a Bible salesman, quote, well, lady, I'll tell you the truth. Not many people want to buy a Bible nowadays, and besides, I know I'm real simple. I don't know how to say a thing but to say it. I'm just a country boy, unquote. And then you have your parentheses, you have the writer's last name, O'Connor, and the page number from which you took the quote, 362, the end parentheses, and then your period. So get all of these rules of MLA in your head, because you'll get points deducted if you don't do that properly. So look at that colon after the words Bible salesman. If that colon had been a period, guess what? That quote would have been dropped, because then it would have appeared all by itself as its own sentence. So because my sentence before the quote is a complete sentence, an independent clause, I can put a colon there. If my sentence before my quote was not an independent clause, if it was a dependent clause, a part of a sentence, then I would have to put a comma there. But if there was a period there, my quote would be dropped. So remember that rule. And remember that at the end of the sentence, your period is always going to go after the last parenthesis mark. It is not going to go at the end of the quote. So I would not put a period after the words country boy, because that's not the end of my sentence anymore. The end of my sentence comes after my in-text citation. And the in-text citation is always in parentheses, and it will be the author's last name and the page number. There's no comma in between the two. There's no P for page. There's no word page. MLA is very direct and simple when it comes to that. And remember that if you're choosing to write about a poem, and you certainly can do that, you would place the line number in your in-text citation, not the page number. And remember too that again, any quote appearing by itself as a sentence is dropped, causing those point deductions. So you'll take part 1 of the midterm by going to quizzes on our Brightspace course page, and then by looking for Midterm Exam Part 1. Those questions will be multiple choice and they will be timed. And you have to take it before 11:59 p.m. on Sunday the 11th. You can upload your short essay for Part 2 into the assignments section on our Brightspace course page. So look for Midterm Exam Part 2. And again, you want to upload that draft just like you want to take that Part 1 no later than 11:59 p.m. on Sunday the 11th, because it will close after that. And if you have not taken Parts 1 and 2 after that point in time, then you receive a 0 for both of those. Let me try to quickly give you an example of how to realistically choose a piece here and approach it for Part 2. So let's say that I particularly liked Desiree's Baby by Kate Chopin. Remember that piece we read back in week 2 about a story of a couple who is married, and this is happening before the Civil War. It was written within our time period, so after the Civil War, but it's set before the Civil War during the time of slavery in the South. And we had Desiree and Armand, and Desiree had a baby, and as it turned out, that baby appeared to be of mixed race. And so Desiree was the one who was blamed for that because her origins were uncertain. She was found as a baby and adopted by a family. But the truth came out, in the story at least, that Armand was actually the person of African American descent. And he had hidden that all along and wound up sending his wife and his own child out of his home in order to keep the truth about his own heritage from coming out, because he knew that if it came out, he would lose his plantation, he would lose his wealth, and he himself would become a slave. So let's say if you chose that piece, and you're looking back at the prompt questions here that you need to comment on. The first one is, what are the main messages and themes that are inherent in it? Well, we're talking about relationships, we're talking about racism, we're talking about one's own heritage, and we're talking about, you hear this phrase, systemic racism now. Well, there definitely was systemic racism in the Deep South, in the antebellum South. The whole economy was based upon it, right? And so we see what that does to people. We see what it does to its victims, like Desiree and like the baby. And if you remember at the end of the story, Desiree walks away with the baby, and she has on a very sheer nightgown, and she's barefoot, and she just walks off. And the reason that she does that is because she knows that she cannot remain with Armand, and she knows that if she goes back to her adoptive parents' home, that they will then be degraded by the community and ostracized by the community, and they will suffer. And she doesn't want that to happen. So she feels that there's no alternative other than just to take the child and go off into the woods and just essentially prepare to die there, because she doesn't want her child to be a slave. And so you have this very heart-wrenching ending there. So definitely racism is a theme, and what is real love? What does it look like? What kind of sacrifice does it require? And then one's own heritage, one's own identity, what happens to us when we don't accept that. And really Armand has a choice to make. He has to choose between doing what he knows to be morally right, and plunging himself into all kinds of trouble, or lying to the world and lying to himself and disowning his own wife and child, and remaining wealthy and popular in his society and in his culture. So those are the themes. And that would be what you might write your first paragraph about. So the genre. We know that this is local color realism. How do we know? It's a very realistic portrayal of what's going on, right, in the world in this time and place. Now, it is not just complete naturalism, because Armand has a choice and Desiree has a choice in terms of how they act. The choices may be limited, but they have the choice. So it's not just total doom and gloom like naturalism. We know that it's local color because we get the description of this time and place, this rural place where this big plantation house is located. We get the vernacular, the dialect of these people. We hear them in their Creole accent, because this is set in Louisiana. And we can hear what they really sounded like in that time and place. So we have all of those, elements of local color. And then in terms of techniques, you could also talk about the many techniques that are used. There's a lot of imagery being used. There may be some symbolism going on. So one object standing in for an idea, and perhaps motifs going on in the piece. And there's a lot of descriptive writing. And so what elements let you know that this text is serving as an example of local color realism? We just talked about that. And you might also point out some techniques. So that's a concrete way to sort of show you how this paper should be done. So if you were going to begin your introductory paragraph writing about a piece like Desiree's Baby, you might begin broadly with a hook. You might say something like, love and marriage may never be easy. They may always present challenges. However, love and marriage in the antebellum South may have presented specific challenges that we do not necessarily face in the same way today. And so now you're going to narrow a little more, and you're going to say, through a careful analysis of Kate Chopin's Desiree's Baby. And remember, titles of shorter works are always placed in quotation marks. So every time you mention the title, you're going to place it in quotation marks. If it's the title of a longer work, you're going to italicize it. And you can look in the syllabus and see what's correct for each one, right? So through a careful analysis of Kate Chopin's Desiree's Baby, one may see that it is an example of local color realism, and one may note that the primary theme centers on love and marriage with a sub-theme of racism, or whatever you think the theme may be. So that's how you're going to begin. You are going to avoid using first-person I, no me, unless it's part of a quote. You will avoid using third person, no you, no your, unless part of a quote. You're going to use one or ones instead. One may argue that, one may see that, one may observe that, or just restructure the sentence so that you don't even have to have that first part of it on there, right? But no I and no you unless part of a quote. So hopefully this is helpful to you as you prepare for the midterm exam, and I will see you next time around.